comment suspicion.
Oh, shit.
Yes.
Good morning, Lord Brailsford.
Good morning, Ms. Barama. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good morning. Now, you have a witness for us?
Yes, I do. The first witness today is Constance McCready.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. McCready could be brought in. Now, good morning, Ms. McCready. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. Just looking for you. Yeah, hi.
Not in my usual place, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Right, you're going to be asked some questions, obviously, by Ms. Barama. So, when you're ready, please, Ms. Barama.
Okay.
Thank you, my lord. Good morning, Miss McCready.
Morning.
Please, could you confirm your full name?
It's Connie, well, Constance McCready. Yeah.
Thank you. And the inquiry has your details.
Yes.
You've provided a statement about your fiancé, Jim Russell. For the record, that statement reference is SCI WT 0273502. To remind you, there is a restriction order in place. You are able to name your fiancé, your daughters, and the 3 hospitals that your fiancé attended. Please don't mention any other names or institutions. Thank you. Your fiancé sadly died of COVID on the 4th of May 2020 at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary at the age of just 51.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us a bit about your fiancé and your family?
Yeah. Jim was amazing. He was just full of life. We had so much. We were only together for 6 years, but in those 6 years we done so much. Like it was, if people said what we had in 6 years, most people don't have in a lifetime. And I'm so grateful that I had those amazing 6 years with him. He loved anything vehicle. He used to motorbikes, his cars, trucks. Within the industry, he was called Big Gorgeous because he was pristine. Everything, like his trucks, everything. They used to say to him, "Do you wear your slippers in that truck?" Because it was that clean. He was just full of life. We used to go to, like, we loved old school music. He loved his football. So, and like he didn't have any kids of his own, so I had my 2 daughters were. He adored them like his own. And he's missed our grandson. He'll be too soon. But he was full of life. Shouldn't be gone, but.
Thank you. Now, of course, you were engaged. Had you set a date for the wedding?
Yeah, we'd actually set a date, 2019, but we cancelled that due to just issues that we didn't want certain people at our wedding, and we were like, do you know what, just, we'll do it ourselves in the garden, because the lady that was marrying us, she actually done Jim's funeral. And then, and I'd says to her, I says, can you get married anywhere? She went, I says, living room, but she's like, anywhere you want. And I said to him, right, we'll get married in the garden. And that was meant to be the June 2020, but we never got to that. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
And you were due to go on holiday on the 14th of March 2020, but that didn't happen because...
No, Spain went into lockdown, so...
Yeah.
But he kept saying to me, come on, we'll just go anyway. And I'm like, no, we're to be stuck in a hotel. In hindsight, it's like, if we did go, would it be a different circumstance? Would they still be here? And I mean, there's a lot of buts and ifs and buts throughout all this. But it was, yeah, we never got. But he wanted to go. Yeah. And I was like, no. Because we could have been stranded over there as well.
Yeah.
But maybe it would have been a better thing, I don't know. Who knows?
Thank you. You go on to say that Mr. Russell had stopped working a week before the first lockdown, which commenced on the 23rd of March 2020, as he'd been concerned that he might be more vulnerable because of an illness when he was just 23.
Pneumonia when he was young. But, so he thought that might have been something that would have put him into the vulnerable category, that's the word. Yeah. But after, when I spoke to the consultants and that, after Jim died, like that was one of the questions, like, did he have underlying health issues that we didn't know about, he didn't know about? And they're like, no, nothing. And obviously because they looked at that, but his lungs were fine. There was, because he'd done, like the year before, he'd done the test, the blow test thing,
right,
to check his lung capacity, and it was fine. She says all the results came back fine. There was nothing that he'd no underlying health issues that would have caused anything. Yeah. But like that, Jim had a agreement with the doctor. He doesn't see him, and he doesn't see him. So, like Jim, he wasn't one for taking tablets. I'm a bit like that myself. He didn't take, like, getting on the paracetamol in the water when he was ill. It was like, have you took that yet? And he's like, aye. You know, he was just one for... So we didn't know if there was anything, but there wasn't. There was nothing that...
But he was conscious of that, and he told his boss that... he was a lorry driver, and he told his boss that he wasn't happy having people come near his cab to sign paperwork. And for that reason, he stopped working just before that first lockdown. Around the same time, he started to feel unwell. Is that correct? Yeah, about the 20th, 21st of March. He just like a cold, like he just a bit. Just cold symptoms. And it wasn't until the following week when Jason Leach was doing a live interview, and he turned around and said, if anyone's got flu symptoms, it's not flu, it'll be COVID. And that's when I was like, right. That's... Because before that, you'd been slightly concerned, but because he didn't have a continuous cough at that point, you hadn't sought help. Because you were going, you say in your statement, you were going with the advice coming from the government, and it was that, you say that what you understood it to be was that if you didn't have a temperature, if you didn't have a continuous cough, then it was unlikely to be COVID, and you didn't need to contact anyone. But that, on the... that day, the 29th of March, I think, you watched that broadcast, and when those symptoms were mentioned, you did become concerned at that point, and you told your fiancé that he had to be checked, and you called NHS 24, is that correct? But they said that he just needed to take paracetamol and water. Is that right?
Well, that's what they were saying, and I was like, no, you need to see him. And then that's when they told me to go to Stop Hill, to take him to Stop Hill for it to be checked.
And when you did, I think you mentioned in your statement that Mr. Russell collapsed.
He did. He'd collapsed in the bathroom. Because I had got up through the night on the 29th, and he got up through the night, and I went down the stairs, and he hadn't slept. He was just sleeping all day. That was like prior to, like, so his symptoms deteriorated throughout the week. One thing Jim didn't do was lie about and sleep. I mean, that's something he never done. And that week, towards the end, he was sleeping all day. On the Saturday night, I was actually video calling my friends, because one of my friends is a nurse. And I was like, I'm concerned about him. And she's like, is his lips blue? Or, you know, and I was like, no. And I was just, like, I done a few videos of Jim, like, walking. And you just seen the deterioration. I mean, Jim was a 6'2", big, strapping, healthy guy, and you see him struggling to walk out the toilet. It's just not right, you know. And I'm like, this isn't right.
So at that point, after he'd collapsed, despite earlier that day, NHS 24 telling you all he needs is paracetamol and water, you could tell, well, clearly there's a reason for him collapsing, and you contacted them again. And at that point they said, go to Stop Hill Hospital. And you went to the assessment unit there, and Mr. Russell had to go in alone, and he was back out in 5 or 10 minutes. Why was that?
Because they said, they said to him, you've got all the symptoms of COVID, however, there's antibiotics in case of a chest infection. We don't have the facilities here to test you.
What did you think of that?
Well, if you don't have the facilities there, send them somewhere that has the facilities to test them. But you're going on what they tell you is the best, and I'm like, to Jim, I don't understand this. But you're going on what, like, at that point, we were going on what the government were telling us, what the NHS was telling us. But it just deteriorated and deteriorated again. But like prior to him going into Stop Hill, I was sitting in the car room and I just broke down. And he's like, what's up? And I went, because obviously I was like fascinated on it for the January. I was watching it for China and Italy, and Jim would come home from work and go, you watching that again? I went, I'm just terrified of it. Just something made me, I mean, I used to go shopping at night time, you know, because I didn't want to be around anything. And obviously with watching everything, I'd seen people going into hospital and not returning. So I was thinking he was going to get into Stop Hill and I wasn't going to see him again. He wasn't going to return. And when he walked out, I was like, that's not right.
Did you think, did you wonder why it was a COVID assessment centre if they didn't actually have facilities for testing COVID?
You tell me. That just baffles me. It's like, well, why send them somewhere to be assessed, but they can't do the proper assessment? And like one of my bugbears as well throughout was talking about temperatures, like high temperature, cough, loss of taste or smell. Those weren't symptoms that Jim had. You know, like, he eventually got the loss of taste or smell, but not throughout. And like I was looking through his medical records, and the whole way through the time that Jim was in hospital, his temperature, even when he was first admitted, his temperature was never ever high. Like and I used to get really angry when they put all these temperature machines in restaurants and things. I'm like, that doesn't mean that you've got COVID if you've got a high temperature, or it doesn't mean that you've not got COVID because your temperature's below a certain, you know. And that was one of the things that I actually went to the papers and I went to the TV because I thought, yous aren't telling people the correct information. I knew that it wasn't vulnerable people, it wasn't elderly people, there was young people getting this who were fit and healthy, and yous are telling people, oh, it's only these 3 symptoms. Well, no, it's not. It's not, because Jim didn't have those 3 symptoms.
Yeah.
You know, but every time I done an interview, they never ever disclosed that.
Right.
And I'm like, why are they not disclosing that? I don't know why they. I don't know what the big cover up was. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you. So you were sent home, and Jim was sent home with you, Mr. Russell, and he continued to become worse.
Yeah.
And in the early hours of the 31st of March 2020, you spoke to NHS 24 again. This time, a doctor asked you to take him to A&E at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. So you drove Mr. Russell there. Were you able to go into A&E with him?
Yeah. Yeah, and when I got there, they didn't have a note that he was coming.
Okay.
So it took probably about 20 minutes before before the nurse came out to get him.
Were you allowed to go with him?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you were limited to the waiting area?
I was able to sit with him in the waiting area. And then the nurse came and got him, put him in a wheelchair, took him away, and that was the last I seen him.
Now, at 7 a.m. later that same day, you spoke to the hospital a couple of times, and you found out that he did in fact have COVID.
Yeah.
He was transferred to the high dependency unit, and then after that later on to the intensive care unit.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Did Mr. Russell have a mobile with him?
Yeah, I was able to video call him, but he was obviously on oxygen and he was struggling to communicate.
Okay.
He'd sent a few messages to myself and friends, which ironically my phone broke yesterday and I've been using his old phone and all the messages are still on it. And just reading through them last night, I'm like, he just knew that people were like, keep the fight up, and he's like, I'm done. There's nothing left, you know. And but I'd video called him about 11ish, back at 11, and then the phone went about 12, and I'm like, I got his phone in my back, and when I answered, it was actually the nurse that was on the phone. And she says that Jim was going to be put on a ventilator. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And I says, can I video call him? So me and my daughter and the dog video called him at 12:20.
That was the following day?
No, that was that night. So it's like he went in the 31st, but this was like after midnight, so it was the 1st April.
Yeah.
So, and he was just terrified. You could just see he was terrified. But that was the last I ever heard him or seen his eyes open. It was 12:20 on the 1st April. He was then taken down and ventilated he was taken down at 2:30 and ventilated about 3:30 in the morning.
How did you find that experience and having to deal with it remotely? Did you ask whether you could attend in person?
Yeah, and they told me no. But I was like, but we've got COVID, so what's the difference? You know, like, why can't I? And they're like, you can't. I used to drive by the hospital because I knew he was in there.
Yeah.
Didn't know where he was. I just drove around the hospital thinking he's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't able to communicate with him after that.
Were you able to call the hospital for daily updates?
Yeah, they would call me and give me updates. Well, no, tell a lie. Glasgow Royal, I phoned in the morning to get an update, and then the consultants would phone me in the afternoon.
Okay.
Which meant, like, nobody was allowed to phone me. Like, if my older sister used to always phone me, and I'm like, got off the phone, and she'd be like, oh, I'm on the phone to see how you get about. Just don't. I'll text you, but do not phone. Don't block my landline, my line, because you were just constantly waiting because Jim was critically ill when he went in. I found out when I was reading his notes last night that he actually had COVID, ARDS and septic shock on, and that was when he was admitted. And that's why I'm so angry, because I think if he had been admitted on this the 29th of March, that would have been 2 days of oxygen and treatment that he could have had, and it probably wouldn't have got to that stage. It might have, I don't know, but that's one of my questions. If he was admitted 2 days prior, would he still be here? Would he have got the treatment that he needed? Not antibiotics. That was never going to take away COVID.
Something that might have given his body a better chance when he was stronger.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, you say at paragraph 59 of your statement that without mentioning the term DNA CPR order, that a consultant told you that if Mr. Russell deteriorated, they wouldn't resuscitate him.
No, they never actually said that. They just, their words, they said we would have to do what's best for him. And I was like, what are you talking about? Do you mean like a DNA? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, absolutely not, I don't agree with that. Because that was only like, what, 3-4 days into being in 3 days into hospital. And I was like, under no circumstances do I give you that permission. You'll fight to keep him here. And then I got the call that they were going to put him on ECMO treatment, like 2 days later.
When you had that conversation with the consultant about, you know, essentially DNA CPR, did the consultant make any attempt to explain to you why that was even being considered, why it was clinically appropriate?
No. I think I was, you know, I had to come off, like, biggest majority of the times after I come off the phone, I've got a pad that I've got, like, and I used to write everything down, and then I would go and speak to my friend who's a nurse. Well, I had two friends that are nurses, and I had to go and say, right, what does that mean? What does that mean? No, he just said that in the best interest of Jim, but I was like,
but he didn't explain what that best interest was, or on what basis he was
just because he was so critically ill. Just because he was severe, he was so bad, and they had done everything they could to try and help him. But, like, I mean, they don't need to really explain what a DNA like that is to me, but I know what it was, but I was like, no. So they never, he just says because he was so critically ill, and he was critical, like reading his notes last night, I was reading it, and he was critical for the day that he was admitted. You know, his oxygen levels were low and way below what it should have been. And that's why I get angry, because I think if he was in on the 29th, that would have been 2 days oxygen that he could have, saved him, helped. Well, I don't know. Would hope.
Thank you. You were then contacted by a consultant, I think a different one perhaps, asking if you'd agree to Mr. Russell being put forward for a trial of dexamethasone. What did they tell you was the purpose of that?
They were just saying it was a trial drug that they want, which it was something that they'd heard that was helping save COVID patients. And they wanted, it was that and another drug, I can't remember the name of the other one. But I didn't know, as I said, Jim didn't like taking medication, and I'm like, if he survives and I've gave him drugs, he'll go mental. And so I had to speak to my friend again, and I said, what is that? And she's like, it's something it is given to patients for, forgive me because my brain's fried, I can't remember, but it's a steroid. Yeah. She says it's not going to do him any harm. So I thought about it that night, and I went, right, okay, and I phoned him back the next day and said, yeah, okay, go ahead and do it. So.
And they started him on that.
Yeah.
You then mentioned that you learned that it would be possible to speak to Mr. Russell by means of a hospital cordless phone. Did that make a significant difference to you, being able to do that?
Not really, no, because he was in a coma. And you're like, did he hear me? Obviously, who knows if that's... It made a slight dip, but I was a bit angry that I didn't know about it prior to that, because that was like 4 or 5 days he was already in hospital, and then I discovered that because I was watching other programmes, just like I discovered the other stuff by watching other programmes, and you're like, well, why not come and tell us these things?
Did you think there should be more information about the things that were available?
Yeah. I told you about the Get to Know Me, which I discovered through a programme that was done down south. And I was like, oh wow, what's that all about? So I phoned Aberdeen, because he was in Aberdeen at the time, and it was only the week before he died. And I was like, do you do that? And she went, oh yeah. And I was like, because they didn't know. I mean, he was in hospital for 35 days, and they only really got to know him, 5 days before he died. So they just had this person lying there, not knowing who he was, not knowing me, not knowing my daughter, not knowing the dog, not knowing anything about Jim at all. And you're like, and when I done that, and I sent pictures and I wrote a story about him and what he liked, and the nurses were like, God, what a difference, because we can actually speak to him now and relate to like yourself and the dog. And I mean, the dog was his life. I mean, that was his pride and joy. So they were actually then able to talk about us rather than
to him.
Yeah. I mean, they probably didn't really speak to him apart from, well, we're just going to do this to you, Jim, or how you feel, and obviously he can't reply because he was in a coma. But yeah, that's things. I mean, when I spoke to the consultants for the Royal, Glasgow Royal, after Jim died, she said, is there anything, and that was one of the things I brought up. I said, you really need to communicate more with the families, and don't have them having to ask you. You need to tell us what we can get and what we can't get. The same with the video calls. Didn't know about that either until I found out on TV. And I'm like, well, why have I not known that either? So like that, I only had that for the last, 10 days or something. And I got them every day. But
And that was using the hospital near
me
system?
Yeah. Which, since Jim's passing, I've had counselling and psychology because I've been diagnosed with PTSD. But it's, why not tell people these things? And so my psychology, sorry, that's what I was lost train of thought there. When I first did my psychology, the Near Me's exact same music that was played when Jim died. And I remember the first day I went on to my appointment, and I just was like, she came on, she's like, you all right? I went, that music just took me right back to waiting in the queue to speak to Jim. So I had to mute it, but then as the months went on, they actually put a mute button first, so you could actually mute it, because obviously it wasn't just me, other people was relating to that as well. So it's small things like that people don't really understand.
Thank you. Now, going back to Monday, the 6th of April 2020, you touched on this, I think, briefly just before, but you were on that day consulted about Mr. Russell receiving ECMO treatment, and that's a treatment used in the case of respiratory failure to help with the exchange of gases and pumping blood around the body. Were you in support of the ECMO treatment?
Yeah. I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. I thought something had happened, but it was to say that he was being put forward for ECMO treatment. And then obviously when I'd done my research into it, I was like, well, that's great that he's been given that opportunity, because there's only 3 in Scotland, and to be put forward for that, you've got to be healthy. You've got to be okay. He wasn't healthy and fit because he had COVID, but you've got to be a good recipient. They won't just put anybody. Sorry, they won't just put anybody on that. So that was promising. I felt right. Okay, he's going to get that, and that'll save him.
And it was for that they said he had to be transferred to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. And you asked to visit, but you were told you wouldn't be allowed. How did you feel about that?
I was devastated because obviously we had COVID and that would have been passed. Like, you know, like the quarantine, if you say that, the stagey. But I just thought, what if he goes to Aberdeen and I don't ever see him again? You know, but it was just, it's just devastating that I never, like, I watched a lot of programmes about COVID, and I remember there's this one man, and he, like, watching his story was the exact same as Jim's, exact same. But they decided they were going to turn his machine off, but they decided at the last minute to let his family in, and he survived. And they said it was because he heard the familiar voices, his wife and his kids. So then I was angry again, because I was like, well, why did I never get that chance to do that? Because that was around about the same time as Jim died, and I'm like, it's like, I remember Lord Brailsford said yesterday about, was it different areas were different, like, just for talk's sake, North Lanarkshire had different rules than Glasgow, or who decided to let the person in? Was it the sister? Was it, you know, it should have been the same across the board. It shouldn't have been, well, that health board's letting you in and that health board's not letting you in. You know, I had already had COVID. Why couldn't I? Was probably safer than the people that was working, than the doctors and the nurses, but I couldn't go in and sit in a room. I would have been quite happy staying in that room forever with him without leaving it, you know, and not to be given that opportunity for him to hear a familiar voice. That's what people expect in life, and when you're ill and in hospital, you expect that, and all the rights were taken away from us.
So you would have happily sort of put everything else in your life to the side and gone and stayed in the hospital room with him on a sort of fold out bed or something like that, and just been there. Thank you. Now, on the 8th of April 2020, Mr. Russell was taken to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, and you called to see that day to see how he was settling in. The following day, you called again. What sort of response did you receive the second day that you called? That
was a different response. It was like, don't phone us, we'll phone you. And I was like, excuse me? I says, nobody's called me to give me an update. And she's like, well, we're too busy. And I was like, and that was obviously a different response from what I had in Glasgow. You know, like, they were like, I had to phone them, the first one, and then the consultants. But obviously Aberdeen had a different way of working, like, which was fair enough. I mean, I can't fault anybody that looked after Jim. The nurses and the consultants then after that were great. I mean, they phoned me every morning. The nurses would phone me in the morning, and then I would get my consultant in the afternoon. So I put that aside. But it was at first I was taken aback, because I was like, okay, then that's what I'd done prior. I had to phone, and she's like, well, that's not how it works here. And I'm like, okay, fine, fair enough, I've got it. So.
And that worked well. The nurse would call you in the morning, the consultant in the afternoon, so you had an update twice a day. Now, Mr. Russell continued to be on a ventilator at that time, is that right? And you mentioned that while he was in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, you started being able to have near-me video calls with him. How did you both find that video calling system? Was he able to communicate with you at all?
No, because he was in a coma.
Did it give you comfort being able to see him?
Yeah, I remember the first day I phoned, and she's like, are you sure you want to do this? He's obviously hooked up to machines, and there's machines everywhere. There was a ventilator on one side, the ECMO on the other, and the tubes, and I was like, I don't care what he looks like, I just want to see him. And yeah, it was tough the first day I seen him, but I just looked through the tubes and everything else, you know, and I remember one day he actually had, they kind of reduced his sedation, and he'd a tear running down his eye, and I was like, he heard me. It was only one day, and I spoke to the nurse and I went, do you think he heard me then? She went, yeah. She says, yeah. And that gave me a wee bit of comfort, knowing that that day that his sedation was down slightly, they would have hopefully heard me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I take it at this point you were still being denied in-person visits.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have been on the video call. A week before Mr. Russell died, you received a call from a consultant telling you he was in a critical condition. At that point, were you told you could have essential visits or end-of-life visits or anything like that? Still no?
No.
Did you ask to visit?
Not at that point, no.
Okay.
I actually had to phone, when I got that phone call, I couldn't take it in, I couldn't understand what they were saying to me. And one of the other consultants that had looked after Jim, she had actually emailed me. So she's like, if there's any questions you have, contact me. So I contacted her and she phoned me and I was like, right, I was talking to the consultant, but I don't understand what he means. And she's like, I says, but I couldn't say it. I couldn't actually say what he was saying.
Yeah.
And she says, do you want me to say it for you? And I was like, aye. And that's when she said, he's probably not going to survive. But I just couldn't understand what he was telling me because I wasn't taking it in.
Yeah.
It was hard to take in what they were telling you because it was a lot to take in. I mean, there was a lot about Jim. I mean, it was like reducing, like, because my pals would say, ask about your sodium levels, ask about this, ask about that, and I'm writing it all down going, I haven't a clue what I'm asking here. But then they would say, oh, that's actually a good sign, or that's a bad, or that's, you know, because talking to people, you don't, when they're, I don't know, I just couldn't take it in. It was like, you only pick up on certain things, and then there's other, and then when you read back, you go, oh, aye, right, that's what they said.
Yeah.
You know. So I didn't take it in properly. I knew what he was saying, but and then I couldn't say it myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't say that he wasn't going to survive. No, it was probably unlikely that he was going to survive. And that was a week before, before.
And you say at that point in your statement, and this is paragraph 96, that the hospital tried everything possible and you couldn't fault them, apart from not carrying on the treatment of dexamethasone. And you only found out about that after Mr. Russell died. What did you think about that?
That was the consultants in the Royal, the Glasgow Royal that told me that, and I was like, why was it not continued? And they just said it was an error. And I thought, but like that, when I was reading through the notes last night, it actually says on his transfer notes that he was on dexamethasone. And I'm like, well, it's on his transfer notes. Why was it not? And obviously dexamethasone was a miracle drug for COVID patients. It was helping survive. I haven't got Aberdeen's medical records, so I don't know if they did put him on it eventually, or as far as I'm aware, I don't think they did. But that's another thing. If he was on that, would he still be here?
Another question that's...
There's so many questions, yeah.
The hospital then told you they were going to place a tracheostomy, and that method of ventilation would provide Mr. Russell with a bit more comfort. Were you quite content with that?
I was content with whatever they wanted to do to make him survive. And sometimes I think, was that the wrong thing to do? Because after he got that in, the day before he died, I was on video call to him, and he was, you know that way when somebody's sore and they go like that, and he kept doing it throughout the video call, and he was like, and I was like to the nurse, why is he doing that? And she went, doing what? And I went, he's wrenching as if he's in pain. And she went, oh, I've not noticed that. And I went, he's done it the whole way through the video call. And she says, I'll up his medication, no, his painkiller. So I don't know if doing the tracheostomy was a good thing or not, because he was doing all right, and then all of a sudden he deteriorated after that.
Yeah.
And then, well, we'll go on to what happened.
Sure. So that video call that you just mentioned, that came about after a video call you had with the consultant on the 4th of... that came about after a video call you had on the 3rd of May, I think.
That was the 3rd, that was what I was talking about. Yeah, that's when he was wrenching, and he was like...
Yeah, but before that, a consultant had called you to say that he was going to arrange this video call, is that right? He told you that he was going to arrange a video call for you to say goodbye to your fiancé?
No, that was the next day. That was the 4th. That was the day he died.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The 3rd was the day that I seen him like in pain.
Okay. So, sorry, that's quite right.
Aye.
Because when he suggested another video call, you declined that offer.
Well, what had happened was,
you want to see him in person.
What had happened was my usual morning call never came, and I'm like, it came to 1 o'clock. I was like, this isn't right. This isn't right. Why am I not getting my call? So I called the hospital, and it was, I don't even know who it was. It wasn't Jim's nurse or anything like that. It was, I couldn't even really understand what he said to me. And he just went, they called him James because his name was James. James is going for a CT scan, and the consultant will phone you in about 3 o'clock. And at that point, I just knew there was something out of the ordinary. And we were in lockdown, and I didn't care. I actually said to my neighbour, I said, can you come in at 3 o'clock for me? Because I just knew something wasn't right. And then the phone call came at 3 o'clock to say there was nothing else they could do for him. And that's when they offered me a video call, and I was like, absolutely not, I'm coming up. I want to be with him. Would you like a
glass of water?
No, you're all right, you're fine. I says, absolutely not, I want to be with him. And they said, that's fine. I says, but it'll take me over 2 hours to get there. Yeah. Then my sister had to drive me Aberdeen. Which was it was a journey, because that 2.5 hours I was calling and video, texting the family and friends to say what was about to happen.
Could you read, please, from paragraph 104 to 107 of your statement?
My sister drove me and my daughter to Aberdeen. It was the worst journey of my life. I spent 2.5 hours phoning everybody, telling them what was happening. When I arrived at the hospital about 7:30, I collapsed at the front door. The chaplain was there to meet me, and he told me I only had an hour with Jim. And I said, what happens if he doesn't die in that hour? I wasn't leaving him. Me and my daughter got in at 8 p.m. I was very conscious of time, and I kept looking at the clock. I knew someone who had been on a ventilator and had turned it off, and they survived. So I was thinking, hoping that he might start breathing himself. I was hoping that was going to happen. About 8:10, I asked for the ventilator to be turned off. and he died instantly. I was so angry that I lost 50 minutes with him being alive because of what the chaplain had told me. When I came out, my sister had told me that the chaplain had said to her that it would be instant. And I was like, well, why did he tell me something totally different? Because that's 50 minutes I could have had speaking to him alive. There's a lot of anger because there's a lot of things that were taken away from me.
What had the chaplain said to you about that?
That was his words. He says, you've got an hour.
Yeah.
And I says, what if he doesn't die in that hour? And he went, you'll have to leave. And I'm like, I'm not leaving until I'm not leaving. I want to be with him when he dies. He should never have said, he should never have said to me, he should have told me it would have been instant, because in my head I'm thinking, hey, if I turn it off now, by the time the machine, I don't know, I've never done this before.
You were trying to plan ahead?
I'm thinking I've got another 50 minutes with him, hoping he might breathe himself, hoping, but it was instant. I mean, he died instantly.
With everything going on in your mind, you were just thinking that you didn't want to leave and leave him to die alone?
No.
Is that right? What do you think about only being given an hour to say
Disgusting.
goodbye?
Absolutely disgusting.
Were you told why you could only have an hour?
Can you remember what, I can't remember what they... Oh, there was somebody else coming in after me, who I met in the corridor.
Right. Was this in a shared bay, or was he in a room by himself?
It was in a room by himself, but I'm assuming when he was taken out, the other one would have been brought in. I don't know.
Okay.
So
you weren't seeing him in the room that he had been looked after? Why was that? Did they say to you why you couldn't have just
I think it was
been in?
because, like, there was 3 ECMO machines. 2 got turned off that day, and 1 never, which I've spoke to you about as well, which I wonder why was 2 switched off and another one kept on, who survived.
Yeah.
He got another 16 days.
Right.
All his organs failed. Jim's organs never failed. And I'm like, well, why did... Because he was in the medical profession. He was a director, a clinical director. And I'm like, did he get extra time because of his status? And Jim and another guy get turned off the same time. Because they all went in at the same time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and...
And to your knowledge, he was the only one with organ failure, but his machine...
I don't know about the other one, but I know because it was a documentary, it was on about him, so that's why I know about it. It's online, you can read about him. And I just think, why did he get longer?
Yeah.
You know, like, normally the ECMO treatment, for normal cases, it's normally 2 to 3 weeks that you're on ECMO. Because then after that, it won't do anything, but with COVID, they did continue with it. I mean, Jim was on it for 28 days. They did, because they did say that to me as well previous, that normally you're only on it for 21 days and then we need to reassess at the time, but they still continued with it. But yeah, the Aberdeen, it was just a horrible experience. It was eerie, and it was just horrible. And I remember walking out the room. My daughter, she ended up leaving because she couldn't handle. She was there when we turned the machine off, but she ended up going out and sitting with my sister. And I remember walking out. I was just absolutely devastated. And the nurse, we were walking down the corridor, and she went, "I'm not supposed to do this," and just grabbed me and gave me a cuddle. She says, "You can't be doing this without, you need this."
Yeah.
Wait,
did you turn the machine off yourself?
No,
or was
no, they
it
done that.
somebody?
The
Did
nurse.
that person say to you, you know, are you sure you want to do this? If you do
Oh,
this,
yeah,
they
yeah, are
could
you ready?
go- But did they say to you that when we turn this machine off, he could die instantly?
No.
Nobody sort of highlighted that to you?
No.
Okay. Would that have affected your decision
Yeah.
if someone had mentioned that?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
I would have been with him for the hour. I would have kept him alive for that extra.
And just to be clear, nobody explained to you why you couldn't have this visit in the room that he had been treated in, rather than a room that was being used for multiple.
Yeah, I think that was the reason, because there was other patients in
Right,
the
so he
ward.
wasn't in a private room or a side room, he was in a shared bay.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
he'd been
because when you were
brought
on
in.
video call, you seen the other patients at the
Okay.
other side. I mean, it's a big operation. It's not. I mean, there's machines all over the place. And that's what they did say. It was because obviously the other patients were in, and you had to be like properly. I mean,
Yeah.
I had to mask and which I didn't even. I still gave him a kiss. I didn't care. Wasn't meant to, but I was like,
Yeah.
no stopping.
Thank you. Now, moving on from there to the section of your statement headed bereavement, could you please tell us about the funeral arrangements you made?
Yeah. So Jim's funeral was on the 18th of May, which obviously, as you know, on the 15th of May, Downing Street were having cheese and wine. I was only allowed to have 20 people in the crematorium. We were still in lockdown. I lived in Glasgow, so we were in lockdown forever. Our area was locked down all the time. But I did arrange for people to line the street just to pay their respects. And in fairness, although he didn't have the funeral he should have had, he did have a, if that makes sense. Because there was people lined the street on his path to the crematorium. So having to choose 20 people was tough as well. I couldn't have the people that he would have wanted there, because I had to choose family members. It was, you're going through grief, you're going through what you're going through, and then you're having to decide who you have to choose to come in to a funeral. You couldn't have the wait, couldn't have what you normally would have. Although I did disobey, I didn't disobey lockdown. I had a gathering in my garden, because I had a big garden. So, but everybody was 2 metre distance, weren't they? It was like, they were up in that corner, they were in that corner, but don't talk, don't get near anybody. So I was still, because I thought, I can't not have anything.
You were trying your
and it
best
was just, my neighbour had made sandwiches and that for us and sat them out, and I thought, I can't not have anything. I can't have it. I mean, it was bad enough the 35 days prior to that, and then, it was just...
You were trying your best to give him the best send-off within the extent of the law at that time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in your statement that, you mentioned just now having friends and family line the road. And you say in your statement that you had them in Celtic colours, as Mr. Russell had been a big Celtic fan.
Yeah. And then that was another anger, because on the morning of his funeral, I got a phone call for the funeral directors, because we had contacted Celtic to say we were going to do a drive-by, because we stayed right behind Celtic Park. And on the morning of the funeral, we got a phone call to say that they were announcing the league title at 12 o'clock, and I'm like, so they wanted us to divert the coffin, the hearse and that. So I was raging at that as well. And then all the papers were writing, oh, Celtic fans disobey lockdown, and it wasn't. It was actually for Jim's funeral.
Right. So
Because-
there were enough friends and family who made the effort to come that the local papers picked up on it?
Yeah, they said that it was fans out disobeying lockdown, but it was nothing to do with that. It was obviously prior to that, people were wearing, God, even people that never wore football tops or anything, they were all wearing them just because. That was what he liked.
Thank you. And if we move on from there to the financial impact that this had on you, would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. Because we weren't married, common law isn't law in Scotland, which I discovered. So I was basically
Common law
nothing.
marriage.
Yeah. Basically, I was nothing in the eyes of the law. Even though I was able to decide on his medical care and everything else, when it came to anything, I was nothing to be told that. And even when I was registering his death, you know, it was like, it was just horrible. Like, it was just horrible. It was horrendous. So I had to actually apply, because Jim was estranged from his family.
Okay.
So I had to apply to the courts. Obviously, the courts were closed because it was lockdown. I had to apply to be his executor, which took way longer than what it should have. But that's something that, like, I would like as well, because people don't talk about these things when people die, the impact. I mean, I set up a support page, and I had other partners messaging me and going, I might lose my house. I didn't know if I was going to lose my house. Me and my daughter didn't, you know, so I was trying to grieve, plus I was worrying about whether I was going to lose my house. Because obviously I needed to be the executor to deal with all that stuff.
Yeah.
But people don't realise the impact of, you know, like, and I know it happens in everyday life when somebody loses a partner, but who nowadays actually gets married, really? Like, there's nowadays, the biggest majority of people just live together and they get, you know, like, that's just life. But I think that's a law that needs to be changed, you know, like, common law should be. I mean, we lived together for 6 years. We were engaged for 5 years. We were getting married the month after he died. But to know that you're nothing in the eyes of the law. I mean, in life, everything's together. You know, if Jim had survived, like, it would have been my income and his, you know, everything's together.
Yeah.
But as soon as you die, you're nothing.
Yeah.
So, like, Jim had worked all his life. So I didn't get any help. I didn't get any widow's pay. I didn't get any help with the funeral because I earned too much.
His pension,
So his pension just went back into the pot. That goes back into the state, and you're like, well, it's just so wrong in so many levels, and thousands of pounds in lawyers' fees later. You know, I eventually got, but because Scotland courts were closed longer than England courts. The mortgage company was English, and they kept saying to me, but the courts are open. I'm going, oh, you're not listening to me. The courts aren't open. And then I got a phone call not long after Jim died saying that I had 2 weeks to get out. They were repossessing the house. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute here. Yeah. They didn't eventually, but that was another
stress
worry on top of what we were already going through, whether we were going to be homeless. I wrote to Nicola Sturgeon just because of the circumstances. I said, it's not just me, there's many people that's going through this. And they just kept sending me stupid forums. And I went, many times have I told you, I'm not entitled to any of this stuff. I can't get any help. I'm asking you for help. Obviously, it wasn't her that was replying, it was her secretary. Or, I mean, I've got all the letters in the house as well, but you're like, you know, there was just no help for me at all. At all, with anybody.
Thank you. And now, if we could please move on to the other impacts on you and your daughters. Could you tell us, please, what impact it had and continues to have on the three of you?
At the time of lockdown, my oldest daughter lived in London, so she never even got up. She never got up for the funeral. We had to video call her during the funeral. But my daughter that lived, Rhiannon, she was very, the two of them were very, very close to him, but she was only 16 at the time, you know, and she was very, very close to Jim. And, like, as I said, we lived in Glasgow. Everybody else was in North Lanarkshire. And we were in lockdown forever. But it was, I mean, I remember them having a conversation with me months later on, and they just turned around and went, we just want our mum back. Because I was focused on trying to trying to support other people. But that was also supporting me. Although I set up a support group, it was helping me because you were speaking to people that actually knew what you were going through. Because no disrespect, I mean, we've lost my mum and my brother, so I know what grief's about, I know, but this is a totally, like, not having the people there to come in and talk about Jim and look through photos and all the normal things. And getting back to the funeral, I mean, that could have been anybody in that coffin. I never got that closure to see Jim in his coffin, you know, like, and I still look and go, that could have been anybody. That really could have been anybody. And that affected us all because, well, one, my older daughter never even got to come to his funeral. She had to, well, when I remembered to video call because we were too busy with other things. It's just, you know, I mean, even if you didn't lose anybody to COVID, just the impact on everybody is horrendous, you know, and it's 3.5 years down the line and that it's like as if it was yesterday. You know, like I can tell you dates, times, because it's there, you know, and that's the same as my girls. Like, they hate, don't be doing any more video, don't be doing interviews, don't be doing that. They don't like seeing me, they just want me to be me rather than it being. But as I said, but at the end of the day, it's part of our lives now. COVID's always going to be part of our lives. That's how we lost Jim, and I can't take that away. And I do have to at times take a step back and go, you know, my mental health's more important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. And moving on from there, finally, you give your thoughts on what could be done better, what could have been done better, and presumably what could be done better in future. Could you please read paragraphs 151 and 152 of your statement?
Yeah. The getting to know me video call should be standard practice. Having a loved one in hospital is bad enough, however, having no, I'm assuming that's meant to be contact with them, is worse. Yeah. Why were families not allowed to go in? We were isolating anyway. I would have slept in the hospital. The hospitals are still stopping visits due to COVID.
Thank you.
And
now, is there anything else that you would like to mention that we haven't covered today?
Just to say, there's hundreds I could go over, but people keep asking what was the purpose of this? What was the reasoning for doing this? Because we don't want it to happen to others. Nobody will ever, unless you've went through what we've went through, nobody will ever understand what it was like. Nobody. You can explain it and people can go, I totally understand. No, you don't. I mean, I even said to my psychologist and my counsellors, I went, no disrespect to you and no disrespect to them. I says, but this is something you've never experienced before, and they did agree with me. They went, we totally understand that. We just want, personally, I want answers. Whether I get the answers or not, it's a different story. Like, obviously, what I've told you over if he was taken in 2 days prior, if he was given the dexamethasone, you know, who knows?
Yeah.
But I want closure. That's what I want. I just want closure in it all. And I think that's what we all want, is to be able to move on.
Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions for you. Thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Miss McCready. Right, we'll take a 15-minute break now. Thank you.
Good morning, my lord.
Good morning, Mr. Caskey.
I have a witness for you today, and I think we're ready to begin.
Excellent, thank you.
It's Mrs. Mair.
Very good. Can she be brought in, please?
Yes. Have a seat.
Now, good morning, Mrs. Mair. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you. Right, thank you for coming, and Mr. Caskey will have some questions for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, my lord.
Mr. Caskey.
Would you tell the inquiry your full name, please?
Yep, my name is Sharon Margaret Mair.
And you have provided a witness statement to for the inquiry.
I have.
And for the record, the reference on that is SCI WT 0422501. We're here today to talk about your mother.
We are.
You will be aware that there is a restriction order in place, and one of the people that we're not naming is your mother. So I will simply refer to her as your mother or your mum. As I understand it from the witness statement, your mum was born on the 14th of July 1936 and sadly passed away on the 26th of April 2020.
That's correct.
At the beginning of your witness statement, you, and I'm looking now at paragraphs 14 to 16, you provide 3 reasons that you wanted to be involved in the inquiry, essentially. At paragraph 14, you say it's to prevent repetition of what went wrong during the inquiry. At paragraph 15, you talk about having contact with the Procurator Fiscal. And that's obviously a separate process, and no doubt you will hear about that in due course. But at paragraph 16, you say something else, a third reason. Could you read paragraph 16, please?
Yeah, of course. And finally, the third reason I'm providing this statement is because I hope that what happens at the end of this inquiry does not end up in some filing cabinet or a digital drawer and never used again, that any lessons learned are actually acted upon. And the reason that I said this is I've worked on a lot of large projects before, and I've written a lot of lessons learned, and I am aware that there have been a lot of lessons learned by other projects prior to that, which were never pulled out and referred to. And I know how easy it is for something to be written and then forgotten about. So I just really love if this inquiry actually produced lessons learned that was visible and there, if, God forbid, anything like this ever happened again.
Okay. At paragraphs 17 to 20, and I'm not going to ask you to look at those just now,
Okay.
but at paragraphs 17 to 20, you provide a description of the deterioration in your mum's health. Tell me about your mum before that.
My mum was a fun, loving, just a fantastic mother. She loved Loch Lomond. She grew up in a caravan site in Loch Lomond. She'd spend loads of holidays there with her mum and dad, and that's where she met my dad. So the two of them grew up together, like playing on the shores of Loch Fyne. She loved the west coast of Scotland. She loved Loch Fyne. She loved Loch Lomond. They travelled all over Scotland. My dad's family were Italian, so they brought together a Scots and an Italian family, which you can imagine had a lot of love and a lot of fun in it. And she actually had 3 children. She lost a baby in between me and my sister. And my dad died, unfortunately, when he was 49. He was very young. It was very sudden. But he was my mum's first love. and they had a very happy time together. And just before my dad died, I was 21, my sister was 17 at the time. It was a very traumatic incident, and it plays back in flashbacks with me even to this day, and I'm nearly 60 now. But my mum was such a fun person. She loved her bowls. They were very sociable. As we grew up, we had lots of parties in the house. My dad worked a part in the gaming industry, so he had this great, he would bring home jukeboxes and things like that. So we had great fun growing up. They were very sociable people and had lots of lovely friends and everything. But obviously when my dad died at 49, that changed a lot of things. My mum never remarried. She had a friend in the very latter years of her life who was a lovely man, and they were able to travel a bit together. But my dad was the love of her life, and her family was the most important thing to her.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to return to the statement, and I will start at paragraph 17, where you describe your mum suffering a fall in July 2014. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, I remember it really vividly. I was the project executive for the BBC for the Commonwealth Games. So I was responsible for a lot of the Commonwealth Games output and a lot of, I don't know if you remember, there was a massive big kind of festival that was held just outside the BBC headquarters in Glasgow at Pacific Quay, and that was one of the things I was responsible for. And my mum came along one night just to see what our daughter had been up to. And I remember we walked along the Clyde side and she just fell. She kind of tripped over, and there was nothing in front of her and nothing, nothing to cause the incident. And it wasn't like she blacked out, but she didn't know what happened. And at that point, my family and myself realised this.
At that point, at the point at which she's fallen over,
yeah.
Did she know, she didn't know that there wasn't anything to trip over, but did she know what had happened?
No, I don't think so. I don't know whether it was just something kind of in her brain at that point. I honestly don't know. It was the first time we noticed that she kind of lost a wee bit of where she was, what she was doing. And I suppose it may have been going on before that, but that was the first actual incident that we noticed as a family, that she really, there was something not quite right with her. And obviously at that point we took her, over the coming months, we took her to the GP and the hospital and everything, and she was eventually diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's.
And did her condition deteriorate over time?
Yes, her condition did. That was in 2014, and over the next year and a half, probably until the March of 2016, she lived at home. She was perfectly incapable of living at home. We were down at our house very, very regularly. But in March 2016, I believe when you have Alzheimer's or dementia, you can plateau, and then something kind of in your brain changes again. It kind of calcium forms a bit more over the brain. And round about the March time, something must have happened, and she began to get really wandered. We had to take her car away from her, which is a pretty horrendous thing to do to any parent, because that's their independence. And she started to leave the house and started to wander. So basically what happened, by March 2016, we knew she needed some form of care. So it was a kind of care package put in at home, people in and out, visiting, bringing meals. And then it all...
Was that from the local authority, or was that the family?
Yeah, from a combination of both. I was working full time, so I used to go down when I finished work at night, or the family would go down and stay with her. She was never an early bedder, so even if we went down at night, like at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock for a cup of tea, we were all still there at 11 or midnight.
She was married to an Italian.
She was. we liked fun. So she... but then between the March and the July, our condition got worse. And, I mean, there's so many instances I can tell you about, but basically, in the next 3 months, she went downhill.
Tell me about what happened in July. Was there a specific day in July that you recall?
Yeah, I do remember because it was July the 30th, which was my birthday, and we were all going to the Chip for dinner that night. And
That's the ubiquitous Chip.
yes, yes, the ubiquitous Chip. And my two sons and my husband had gone down to see Mum. I mean, she wasn't able to go, but we went down that day to see her, and she really wasn't well at all that night. And we ended up down again on the Sunday. And basically, my husband and I spent most of the Sunday with her. She had, and we now know she'd developed a urine infection, which I know can cause quite a lot of problems. And she was basically, I've never seen anything like it, she was running around the house. So we took her up to the hospital. I took her up to the hospital on the Monday. And she was seen by a doctor and basically given, I think, some medication and told just to go home and it'll be fine. However, it was a young doctor, and it obviously played on his mind, and he phoned me maybe about an hour and a half after we got back home and said, look, I've been thinking about your mum. She's really not well. Can you bring her back up to the hospital? And I took her back up to the hospital, and she never went home again.
How long was she in the hospital?
She was in the hospital for about 2.5, 3 weeks.
And during that period, did you do something about her future?
Yeah, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but I looked at some of the geriatric wards in the hospital, and I could see, and we'd heard of friends who'd parents gone into the hospital, and then they were there for a period of time and they deteriorated really badly and either never got out or got to home and were a completely different person. So we worked quite rapidly. I researched a lot of houses, a lot of care homes, and we found a care home that the family liked, and she moved into the care home. I think it was about the 3rd week in August. She wasn't happy. I have to say the hospital were brilliant. The hospital were really good. I mean, because the dementia wards were so busy. I remember one night going into the hospital and they had run out of beds and they put my mum in a surgical ward, and there was a surgeon there holding a meeting with his staff, and my mum was sitting beside him in the ward, and he was just letting her sit there. And we walked in, we actually thought she was like part of the meeting because she just didn't know what was going on round about her. But she got out of the hospital about 3 weeks, and we took her to the home that she spent the rest of her life in.
Tell me about the selection process. You said you had looked at several.
Yeah, my eldest son and I and my husband, I think we must have looked about 7 or 8 homes. And probably because of my background, I was quite careful about the research that I looked at, and I popped in at different times just to see how the people in the care homes were being treated, and I whittled it down to 2. The biggest problem was they didn't all have space, and eventually we found one that we really liked. It was all in one level, it was purpose built, she had a room in her own, she had her own bathroom, she had a door that you could go outside and get fresh air, and they had memory rooms and things like that.
What's a memory room?
It's like a room that has things that I remember when I was a kid, like old kind of annuals and like albums and, old radiograms and things like that, and old radios. And it was a really good idea because it stimulates the mind. So she went in there. They didn't have a room. They had 3 rooms or 3 areas, and it was for different levels of dementia. And they didn't have a room that would suit my mum's dementia straight away, so they put her in what you would call the worst situation, which was pretty horrendous for everybody. And we used to leave her at night crying in there. But eventually, and unfortunately this is the way of the world, there was a bed that became available in the part of the building that she would be in, and she went back there and was very, very happy when she wasn't lucid.
So she had periods of...
She still had, at that point, periods of like, why am I here? And I think that happens.
When she was lucid, do you think she was happy to be in the care home?
Probably not. But she was a really happy person. So, you know, anybody that, you know, you could speak to anybody, she was always smiling. She was always asking how you were. I think eventually, my sister died in 2009, and I don't think my mum ever recovered from that. And I think that was the you know, she tended to go back in her memory way beyond that, you know, beyond my dad and beyond my sister, and I think that was the trigger for. I'm convinced there's a trigger in dementia, and I think that's probably what the trigger was for my mum, and she just decided she didn't want to remember.
Okay, the statement indicates that she went into the care home in 2016.
Yeah.
And the next thing which I want to speak to you about is 2020, when lockdown started to happen. Do you recall when it was that lockdown at the care home happened?
Yes, they locked down about 2 weeks. Lockdown was the 23rd, wasn't it, of March. The care home locked down about 2 weeks before that, and they contacted us all by email. All the kind of carers, family, yeah. And basically they said that they weren't encouraging visits. But obviously, if there had to be something, they could have probably arranged it, but they weren't encouraging visits at all. Anything, you had to phone and check how your mum was, or, I mean, my mum never really spoke on the phone or anything like that when I phoned. Apart from one night, actually, we did phone, and she answered the whole phone. But so they closed down about 2 weeks before to any visitations, which, in hindsight, was probably a good thing. And it also made us very aware that there was something major going on in the world, because we hadn't locked down yet. We were all still running about doing what we were doing.
At paragraph 31 in the witness statement, you talk about finding pills. That looks like an aberration in her care when one looks at the rest of the witness statement.
Yeah.
We don't need to go there, do we?
No, we don't need to go there.
So, pandemic happens, lockdown happens. How are you informed that lockdown is happening?
You mean...
How are you told you're not, you got the email?
From the care home?
From the care home?
Yes, we got an email from the care home, and I think I've tried to think back to this. I think before the email came out, I think about a week before that, any visitations you had, there was a conversation, a lockdown within the care home would be happening, but we didn't have a date at that point. And it was only when the email came out to confirm that you know, as of that particular date. I think it was something like the 10th of March that the care home actually locked down.
Now, at paragraph 39 in your witness statement, you talk about a FaceTime call.
Yeah.
Tell me about FaceTime calls.
We did a FaceTime call with my mum around Mother's Day, which was about the 22nd of March. We took a snapshot of it, and it was lovely to see her. She looked perfectly happy, and actually the snapshot we have of her is she's smiling away. She has one of the carers. It's a young girl who used to look after my mum beside her, and they made a card or something. So on that particular day, she looked very happy, although I'm not convinced a FaceTime call was good for her, because I don't think she knew what the heck was going on. But from a family's point of view, to be able to see her and to see her being happy and looked after, it was a good thing.
Right. And you gave a date for that as the 22nd of March. Yep. And around about paragraph 39 and on, you talk about a series of photographs of your mum.
Yeah.
And your mum looking happy and smiling.
Yeah. From the beginning of 2020, I finished up work at the end of in November, December, of 2019 in order to, one of the reasons was to obviously try and spend a bit more time with my mum. So we have photos every time that pretty much we were in. I've got on my phone that we saw, you know, we captured photos of her from January through to the FaceTime one on the 22nd of March.
What you say at paragraph 40, the end of paragraph 40,
Yeah.
is you talk about her happy and smiling
Yeah.
in the photograph on the 11th of April.
Yeah.
And she died 15 days later.
She did.
Okay. You then talk about the 16th of April
Yeah.
at paragraph 45. Tell me about that phone call.
On the 16th of April, I mean, you'll remember that the first part of lockdown, everybody was doing their morning walk on their own. And I went out and did my morning walk as usual. My husband and my eldest son were working from home. And I always took the slot in the morning to go out between about 9 and 10. And I went out for my walk at about 20 to 10 that morning. I remember it really, really clearly. I was walking up the kind of brae at the back of the house, and the phone call came in from the care home to say that I should get to the care home because my mum really wasn't well. The reason I remember that day, the 16th of April, was because that was the day my dad died. And I remember, you know, when the call came in, thinking, well, it was really, you know, I wasn't expecting it. So we took the call. What shocked me a bit about that was I had no warning that she'd been unwell up until that point. As you know, we'd been encouraged to phone our relatives and things like that prior to that.
And did you and other family phone her on a regular basis?
Yeah, or we phoned the care home. We very rarely were able to speak to my mum because she didn't really know what was happening, you know, when you spoke to her on the phone. But you would phone the care home to say, look, you know, it's Mrs. So-and-so's daughter here, and, you know, just phoning to see how my mum is. But I had no pre-warning that she was unwell or anything like that until I got that phone call on the 16th.
16th of April.
Yeah.
So you get a phone call saying, come.
Yep.
Tell me about the visit.
Well, I went back, obviously I went back home, and my husband took me up to the care home, and I suppose you've got to remember this is only 4 weeks into the general lockdown, so people were still kind of a bit, you know, what's going on, what are we doing, what's the right thing to do. We weren't asked to wear, you know, we were out and about, everybody was still out and about, no masks or anything on at this point. But I got to the care home, and I remember going in the door, and the first thing they did, I think, was they were, as you kind of went into the door of the care home, there was a few people a few staff kind of standing about, and I just remember looking at them and thinking they looked overwhelmed. I'm quite sure they weren't sure what was happening and what was doing, and they said they'd put my mum in the room she was in, and basically the door was locked. Well, not locked, but closed. And if I wanted to go in and see her, I'd have to be completely covered in PPE. So. And
at this point, were the staff who were telling you this, were they wearing PPE? I
have tried to think. I don't think they were. No, they weren't all in like head-to-toe PPE. They were. I think they were all had masks or wearing masks. The masks. They didn't have the visor ones. It was the more the kind of papery ones they were wearing at that point. So I was given like a full kind of suit, you know, the white, I can't remember what you call them, and a face mask, a head covering, hands, covering my shoes and everything. And I was taken through to where my mum was in her room, and basically the door was opened and my mum was just lying in the bed.
Was she conscious?
she was conscious. I don't know whether she wasn't moving, but she was conscious. I could tell that she was aware that somebody was in the room. I don't think she knew it was me at this point. Could have been anybody, because I was completely covered. And then they shut the door and left me in the room with her. And I mean, I sat and talked to her for ages. I couldn't even really hold her hand because I was covered in all this stuff. And then when I thought it was the appropriate time to leave, I remember coming out and had to knock on the door so they would let me out, and then I had to take all this stuff off, put it in a bag, and then I was walked out the care home.
Had your mum been tested for COVID?
No.
Tell me about the testing regime at the care home.
There was no tests available, I understand, at that time. I'm personally not convinced my mum had COVID. But I'll never know that because there was no test. But what I do remember, and what I remember coming back and telling my family was that there was a conversation between some of the care home managers as I was leaving that day saying they've got tests at Gartnavel Hospital, they've got tests at Gartnavel Hospital. And there was a conversation, but they couldn't get up. And I said, well, look, I'm walking out. If you give me the authority, we could go up and pick them up for you. And they wouldn't let that happen. Obviously, there's a protocol, but they couldn't get them at that time. So, to my knowledge, I don't know when they got the test, but my mum was never tested for it.
Okay, although it's a little bit out of sequence, you refer to that at paragraph 85.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I asked the question. I wanted it to be, I wanted you to give that evidence just then. If we go back to the chronology, as it were, if we go back to paragraph 57.
Yeah.
I think you say that you think you saw your mum once more.
I've tried to remember, but obviously it was all quite traumatic at the time. I definitely saw her on the 16th, and I definitely saw her the day she died, and I'm convinced, although I can't tell you what date it was, I went back again, or was allowed in again. And I do remember an incident with one of the young carers that was in the home as I was leaving, and she just burst into tears. And all she wanted to do was hug you, but you weren't allowed to touch anybody.
How do you know that's what she wanted to do?
Because she said that to me. She said, all I want to do is hug you. And she said, I can't. And you could tell that because a lot of these carers are young women. They're not, they're maybe not people who've suffered loss themselves, or, and I could see they were overwhelmed by it and not sure what to do, what the right thing to do was. And nobody did that early on in the whole pandemic, and we were all finding our way. But she was just so upset about the fact that she couldn't, it's human nature to want to reach out.
And at that point, did you know whether or not COVID was in the care home? I don't mean for your mum specifically, but in the care home itself. I don't know. No, I didn't. Because I think I remember asking, are there other cases? And they wouldn't tell us. And I think the first time we knew that there was COVID in the care home came from a newsletter that came out, I think, the week after, or around, I can't remember the exact dates, but that it came out on a newsletter, and it was quite a snippy newsletter because somebody had leaked the fact that there was COVID in the care home to the Daily Record, and there was a story covered in the Daily Record. Did you see that story?
Only after I read the newsletter, then we went and searched for it.
So the Daily Record isn't your normal?
No.
You talk about, at paragraph 60, getting another call.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. But firstly, you say it happened at 5 or 5:30, AM or PM?
PM.
PM.
PM. On the 26th of April, it was a Sunday, and you'll remember the weather during that part of the pandemic was absolutely glorious. And we were sitting in the back garden, and I remember getting a call from the care home. I knew if they called us, it was going to be bad news.
Yeah.
And they called us, and we went back to the care home, and it was my husband that took me back to the care home, and I went through the process of putting everything on, going into the room, and I basically sat with my mum for maybe a couple of hours, an hour and a half, I can't remember, and she was just really peaceful. But I remember thinking how she was on her own in this room, locked. I believe they'd stopped giving her solids.
You said locked. Did you mean?
I mean locked as in closed, not
The
locked
door
as in
closed, not locked in.
sorry. And I just remember sitting with her, and it's weird. I have a lot of flashbacks of that moment because I'm completely covered. She's lying there, obviously dying, and I left. I wish I'd stayed longer, but I left. And I got home, and I must have been in the house, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, and the call came that she'd passed away. So that was on the 26th of April.
It's my experience that people will often hold on until the relative has left.
Is that right? Well, that's good. Good to know. Doesn't make me feel so bad now.
Sorry?
Doesn't make me feel so bad now.
No.
That's a good question, obviously.
You talk at paragraph 63 about
Yep.
some difficulty in recovering her rings.
Yeah, it was.
Tell us about that.
My mum's body was taken out very quickly from the care home, and she was obviously taken to the funeral parlour. And my mum was she loved to dress beautifully, and she had a couple of nice pieces of jewellery and rings. And as her dementia got worse, she'd lost a lot of weight, so we'd taken bits and pieces off her, but I never wanted to take her wedding ring or engagement ring off. But I wanted to keep that, and actually on the Sunday when I was in with her, it looked as if it was just going to fall off, and I thought, I can't take that away from her. So I phoned the funeral parlour, and they said no, they wouldn't touch the body. And I said, but we would like the wedding ring and the engagement ring. I'd really like to keep that. And actually, in hindsight, I've looked at the death certificate, and it basically said the body's contaminated. So I can understand why they wouldn't touch it, although I didn't read it like that at the time. But it took us about 3 days and lots of calls to enable that to happen. And, at the time we talked a lot about this. I mean, we were quite a strong family, and we'd gone through grief and trauma before, and we know how important it is to be you've got to ask for what you need. And all we could think of during that time was if there's other people in that situation who didn't have the courage to do that or ask questions. But it was quite soul destroying, phoning the funeral parlour on a regular basis to say, look, we would really like this as a memento of my mum, and she kept it on until she died. But eventually I don't know how they did it or why they did it, but eventually they did do it, and we got them back.
You got them back?
Yeah.
And was
But
that...
not particularly happy way of going about it.
No, but was that something that was particularly important to you and your
Yes.
family?
Yes.
Your mum had been taken to the funeral directors.
Yep.
And then the funeral was organised.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the funeral, my mum died on the 26th of April, and the funeral was the 15th of May. The funeral was really difficult to organise. It was very early on in the pandemic. People didn't really know how to deal with a lot of things, I have to be honest. My mum wanted to be cremated and then interred, which we can talk about later. But we were allowed 20 people at the funeral, I'm just trying to think how best to put this. We were allowed 20 people at the funeral. We got a fantastic celebrant to do it. The funeral parlour didn't suggest streaming it or zooming it at the time, and it was the celebrant, we were thinking about this recently, it was the celebrant that said to us, you know, you should push them to do that. And the funeral parlour kept saying to us, the technology won't work, the technology won't work. But my mum had a lot of friends, we had quite a lot of family, and we wanted them to be there. So we eventually got that sorted, and then 2 days before the funeral, because streaming of funerals wasn't a thing then, we had to send out an email. It was probably one of the hardest emails I've ever had to write, to basically say to all our family and friends, this is the link, if you want to join it, click here. And what was fascinating about that in hindsight is two things. One, people of our generation. I remember one of my friends watching it being streamed and talking to us about it afterwards, and found the whole thing so intense that actually when the celebrant asked him to stand up, he stood up in his own home because he'd never experienced anything like that. Mm-hmm. But the most awful thing for my mum's friends and of that age group was two things. One, they at that time, anybody over, I think it was the age of 70 or 75, was basically told to self-isolate. Mm-hmm. None of them could go. One of our friends decided she was going to come hell or high water, so she did rock up. But several of our other friends couldn't access the streaming. They didn't have the knowledge to do that. And one of our close friends actually watched my mum's funeral about 3 months after she died, which is just not the way it should be.
Tell me about your youngest son. Without naming him, firstly, can you tell me what age he was at the time?
He was, hang on, let me work this out. He was 23.
And was he able to go?
No. He had to watch his grand's funeral via the streaming at that point. To be honest, I don't think he's ever recovered from that. Between the loss of my sister and the way my mum died, I think that's a grief that will be with him for a long, long time. When we walked into the crematorium, what I hadn't realised and what nobody knew was, at that point, you walked in and the seats were single. Mm-hmm. So we walked in and there was only about 6 seats that were set out, and the rest of the people that could come would either stand on their own. But my husband walked in and basically pulled 3 seats together. So my eldest son, my husband and I were in a bubble. So we sat together.
You were living together? We
were living together. So he just pulled them together. But it's quite shocking because when you think even of the streaming, we had no idea what was being streamed, because I'd never been to a streamed funeral before. Now it's like it happens. I didn't know whether the streaming was focusing on the coffin, focusing on the celebrant, focusing on our grief, you know, and we had friends and family watching this from all over the world. And the whole process, nobody knew what was going on. You know, we were all finding our way with it. And, you know, I mean, I still think about when we walked out, thinking that my son's sitting in a room somewhere watching his grand's funeral on a laptop, and we're walking out and not even being allowed to talk or hug the people that are there or kind of celebrate my mum's life in any way. So we took our own cars to the funeral. There was no funeral cars. The celebrant wasn't allowed to shake our hands. The whole thing was just horrendous.
Were you wearing masks at the funeral?
No. Masks weren't mandatory at that point, so we weren't wearing masks at that point.
At paragraph 84, you talk about the second part of the funeral. Could you read that for us, if you can?
My late dad had been interred, so we wanted my mum to be beside him. So 2 weeks after the cremation, During that 2 weeks, my husband contacted the diocese and we were able to get a slot to bury my mum's casket. So basically, the gravediggers dug a hole in the ground for the casket to be laid to rest, but there was no priest or celebrant or religious person allowed to conduct the short service, or we couldn't get anybody to do it for us. So when we put the cask in the grave, I just remember my husband and my eldest son, because we were only allowed to go, and a cousin of mine who was standing quite far away. I remember we were all just kind of looking at one another. I mean, what do you do? Because normally somebody says something. So we put the roses on the cask, and then I ended up having to say something which was the most weird thing, and we could see the two gravediggers just kind of like, they were very respectful. So they waited in distance until the short time with my mum was over. You know, it's not what you expect to do when you're putting your family member to rest.
Were you given any explanation as to why there hadn't been a priest there? You spoke about the
Yeah, I just, my memory of it, my husband, you know, contacted all the relevant people, and they were only allowing a short period of time for this to happen on, and it was a Saturday, so they just couldn't, I don't think they could get anybody available to do it. What I didn't want was my mum's cask to lie in a shelf for God knows how long. I wanted her to be with my dad and my sister.
Priests usually take the Saturday off, don't they?
Yeah, well, that's probably why.
The funeral took place, give us the date again.
The funeral took place on Friday the 15th of May 2020.
Friday the 15th of May. Now, subsequently, have you found out that other things happened on the 15th of May?
Yeah. As you can imagine, on the 15th of May, for us as a family, that was a really, really difficult and emotional day. We couldn't even have a cup of tea with people who'd come and stood with us at the funeral. We couldn't even hug them. Subsequently, we found out that on the 15th of May in Downing Street, they had a cheese and wine pizza party. So while we were saying goodbye to my mum and not able even to bring somebody into her back garden to have a cup of tea with us, those that were making the rules were breaking the rules, and the hurt and anger and complete disregard for people that were going through one of the most cruel and emotional days is just gobsmacking. I mean, if you look at those two scenarios very carefully, you know, one, you've got a family grieving, following the rules, and at that point you weren't allowed to meet like a load of people. You weren't allowed to even have more, I think it was more than one other person in your garden, provided they were like 6 foot away from you. And it's exactly the same time as we were doing that, there was a party being prepared in London to celebrate whatever it was they were celebrating on the 15th of May 2020.
On screen in front of you is paragraph 90 and 91 of your witness statement. Could you read those?
The hardest thing from our personal situation is that there's no closure. The world changed and nobody knew how to deal with that. But the fact that you could not have a normal conversation with people at your own mum's funeral was completely bizarre. I used to meet people weeks after my mum's passing and they had no idea that she'd gone. You want to celebrate someone's life, but it never felt like that, as the majority of people who would have been in physical attendance were watching on a Zoom in their living rooms. We just did not feel connected. Normally, you would hug friends and family at the end of a funeral and swap stories celebrating a life well lived, but that just could and did not happen with my mum's funeral. Yet it did happen on the 15th of May 2020, Downing Street.
Paragraph 92 in the witness statement, you spoke you speak about flashbacks, and you've already given that evidence, so I'm not going to ask you to read that paragraph again. The last thing I want to do is paragraph 93. Can you read that, please?
As per what I said right at the very beginning of my statement, I hope that we do learn from this experience, so if it ever did happen again in the future, someone would draw on all this information and ensure that everyone's needs are accommodated accordingly.
I don't have any other questions for you. Is there anything important that you want to say to the inquiry that you've not had the opportunity to say?
I've only got one thing to say, and it actually kind of happened as I was coming in here because I listened to what was being broadcast and watched what was being broadcast from Boris Johnson. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, as we were coming up the street here, I'm so sorry. No, he said, I'm sorry for the pain, loss and suffering of COVID victims. I find that, and I'm sure the thousands of other COVID victims find that totally unacceptable. It's a total disregard of his own rules. While we buried, cared for, people were left in isolation and we looked after loved ones. Him and his party partied. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Mair. That's all. Right. Now, Mr. Caskey, you're not taking the witness this afternoon, I don't
No,
think.
I'm not. You've got me, I think, all day tomorrow, but...
Something to look forward to.
Indeed.
Right. Someone will let me know when we're ready to go. I'm fairly relaxed when we go.
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That me?
Thank you.